I got a message through a friend a few months ago, and she talked about the need to, or the issue that had come up, and I felt immediately quite strongly about it, because what she'd uncovered, or what she was talking about, was the fact that a group of climate protesters had been told by a judge before their case began, so before the jury came in, that if they tried to mention things such as fuel poverty or the climate crisis, which was actually why they had been involved in the action they had been involved in, but he told them that if they were to mention those items, he would regard them as being in contempt of court. And being brave young people, they did mention it, and they were given an opportunity to retract, but they didn't retract, and so they were then sentenced to 6 weeks or 7 weeks in prison. Now, a retired social worker had been sitting in the court and had been listening to what had happened, and was upset and incensed, I think, by the fact that the judge was, in her opinion, excuse me, and in mine really, was overreaching his responsibility, because obviously judges are there to ensure that, I assume, that the case is held correctly and that it's within the correct legal framework. And they obviously have the responsibility to inform the jury if something that's being presented as part of the defence is not a legal defence. But that's a bit different to saying that they can't even hear it. And obviously the British legal system is quite treasured by the fact that when cases are of a certain seriousness, that a person can opt to be tried by a jury of their peers. So in other words, 12 people from the locality who don't know the facts and don't know the individuals involved, but listen to the evidence and then make a decision. And what had been happening, and I think certain judges were clearly not happy with it, was that when people were hearing the motivations behind some of the actions, they were saying, well, yes, we accept that this person actually did this, committed this offence, but actually we feel that the defence was their action was justified and the cases were dismissed. And this was happening quite a lot, particularly around climate activism. So I think it was in April 2019 when a number of people did a lot of damage at the Shell building, and it was serious amount of damage, but they couldn't just be tried. Well, people felt that they didn't do it just because they felt like going out one day and being vandals. They did what they did to draw attention to an incredibly serious threat to humanity, and to say that people with that motivation, with those types of motivations, shouldn't even be heard by juries, felt completely unjust. And so when we heard that what had happened in the case of the 3 people who were deemed to be in contempt of court because they mentioned the climate crisis and fuel poverty as part of their motivation, the retired social worker who'd been sitting in the public gallery went home and she wrote a poster which said something to the effect that jurors have an absolute right to acquit a defendant on the basis of their conscience. Now that sounds might sound a bit old-fashioned and complicated, but actually that's the wording which appears on the wall inside the Old Bailey, and it relates back to a trial in 1670 where a judge similarly tried to wouldn't release the jury and he kept them sort of in prison or in custody for 2 days and 2 nights without food or water, because they wouldn't give him the verdict which he felt the case demanded. Now obviously that caused an outcry, and the result of the investigation into that was that it was enshrined in law that a jury does have a right to make a judgment which a judge may not agree with, but actually the deciding force is the jury. And what happened to this woman who, Trudy Warner, she made a poster just reminding people that that was the case, and she stood outside the court. She didn't speak to anyone or make contact with anyone, but she did hold the poster, and the judge saw her on the CCTV camera outside, that was outside. He'd recognised her from the day before. This is my understanding of what happened. And he told the police to go and arrest her for contempt of court, which seemed absolutely, well, complete overreach to me. And so, but unfortunately, when the police did arrest her, several weeks elapsed, and then her case was sent to the Crown Prosecution Service, who have, inconceivably, in my opinion, decided to prosecute her, and we think it's for perverting the course of justice, which is an incredibly serious offence, because it's about punishing or trying people who deliberately try to suborn a jury, so they might bribe them or blackmail them or whatever, to get them to give the verdict that this person wants. And it just seems to me on so many levels completely out of order to be doing that, and something that we as a free society need to stand up against, because I think that the legal system properly operated is probably our strongest defence for democracy.
It might be useful to explain why people are silent at the protests and why they don't engage with the public.
Yeah. Well, yes, that's a very interesting point, and it comes up a lot because many of the people who take part in these actions are people who spend their whole life trying to persuade other people about issues they're not familiar with. So the idea of sitting, holding a placard, deliberately not making eye contact or speaking to people does seem a bit counterintuitive. But I think there's been a lot of legal advice on this, because if you were holding a poster like that and you spoke to someone who asked you what it was, and you were outside a Crown Court and you accidentally spoke to a jury member, you could be accused of trying to influence that juror, which would actually be an offence. And I think the other thing is that we've discussed this, lots of people have sort of talked about this and been concerned about it, because most of us are not people who wouldn't speak to another person if they asked us a question. So it's very difficult to maintain it. But my feeling is, and the way I understand it, is that actually what the people we're trying to get through to are people operating within the legal system. So this is an action which takes place outside Crown Courts. It's about trying to help, or not help, but suggest that judges and many other people who are involved in the legal system actually remember what the actual framework is, and that it is the jury who make the decision, and hopefully to bit by bit pull their colleagues back if they try to change things. So it's not to say we don't want to talk to the public, we do, but that part of the protest is silent for that reason.
So yesterday, I suppose the good news is nobody was arrested. The police didn't seem interested in what was happening outside Sheffield Crown Court.
Yeah.
So what happens next?
Well, that's a really good question, because obviously at the moment the person, Trudy Warner, whom I mentioned, who sparked all this, is still facing a potential trial for perverting the course of justice. But since that happened in March, it's now, what will it be? Well, yesterday nearly 500 people sat outside courts. In September, 250 people sat outside courts, some of whom were the same people, but not all of them. Prior to that, there'd been about 30 or 40 people. So we're getting to a stage where 1,000 people so far have done exactly what she did, and nothing has happened. So, is that because what she did should never have been pursued in the way that it was? Or are we all waiting to be arrested? That's why there's the issue. Because somebody who did exactly what we're doing is facing prosecution. Personally, I think there could be various things that happen. It's not a never-ending thing, because it has to be resolved, and I think a lot of it will be resolved around Trudy Warner's case. But I think if the prosecution service is foolish enough to go ahead with this, then I think all they're doing is provoking more and more people to be out on certainly around the courts and spreading the word more, that justice is really under threat. I think a freestanding judiciary which is operating correctly is a critical pillar, if you like, of a free society.